Okay. So Vinay, thank you again for hosting us this week. Uh, Joe and Dimitri have questions, and Dimitri and I had worked on the Reddit scenario and the scenario that we had worked on last week. And Dimitri has some changes he was going to walk you through. So,
Okay.
with that being said, I just want to say, uh, Joe, did you want to start, or Dimitri, did you want to start? Anybody have a?
I mean, I don't really have much, so yeah, I guess I can go first here.
Okay.
Okay.
Get my couple questions out of the way. Uh, okay, can you see my screen? I should just have an ADSM up.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so for this ADSM, this is for like a web app that's sitting behind a firewall. So I want to include multiple ADMs here. Is that a
Mhm.
good idea, or should I try to split things up more?
You can add multiple ADMs, and that's expected behavior. What you do is you put the path as a comma separated value,
Yep.
and it's a good idea to have smaller models split across files because then you can mix and match them. You can have generic models that you can use in multiple entities. It gives you a bit more flexibility with modeling.
Yeah, okay, because yeah, for the web app, I would need one for like authentication and then
Mhm.
a couple common vulnerabilities you tend to
Yeah.
find in the hosting software.
Uh,
Okay, and then
normally,
no, go ahead.
normally what I do is I break it up into stride categories. You know about the stride method, right?
Stride, no.
Okay. Stride is a very well-known threat modeling methodology. It's an acronym that stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. I'll post this in the Discord channel. So these are like six categories of security risks that anybody who is threat modeling has to look at.
Okay,
So what I do is start with creating six ADM files and at least try to find one abuse case per category
okay,
for every entity, which means for every entity I have six files. And then, for example, repudiation normally deals with logging. And logging, there are lots of common defenses and common attacks related to logging. So I can have just a single file and then use it across all entities. So that's one methodology that I use. You can use other methods, but this kind of gives it a bit more structure when I don't know how to get started with.
okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. That's just Stride,
Yeah, let me type it in Discord for you guys. Yeah.
STRIDE. Oops. Okay, I'll leave that there as a note for myself. And then, so when I have mitigations, I should always try to set these up in my ADMs as a policy, right?
Um, Mitigations and recommendations are just plain text information. Now, the idea is recommendations are what you give them so that they can decide whether they want to implement it or not. They may make changes to it. As the title says, it's a recommendation. It's not a mandatory defense that you have to implement. Similarly, mitigation is a plain text list of existing mitigations that you have already seen. These necessarily don't affect your ADMs. These are just textual information for you to capture. It may map to defenses if you want, but there is no strict rule that it must.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I had today. Yeah, Rod and Dimitri definitely have a bit more to go over. So here, I'll cut the screen share and let them take over.
Okay, so I don't know if we covered this the last time we talked, Vinay, but
Mhm.
whenever we started this project, what we ended up doing was taking a workspace. Uh, we cloned the workspace repo. We
Mhm.
and then we took the workspace folder and we copied it into a new directory that was Git controlled. right? So it's a part of our
Mhm.
new repo. And
Yeah.
so we're our plan is to manually sync the workspace. Whenever you make an update, we're going to
Mhm.
manually sync that. Is that a good approach? Because we definitely don't want to create an out of sync set of code, but
Mhm.
I think that's the only way feasibly we can move forward with making sure that we have the latest copy of the workspace.
So that's one method. Second method is you maintain the Git repository of the workspace, but you add a different remote that points to your project directory. And then you keep adding your files to the same Git repository locally.
Okay.
But then when you're pushing it, you push it to this other Git repository that you have put. What happens now is you can pull from my workspace whenever I update. So you can say git pull from my remote, and then you can git push it into another remote that you want. So it still gives you that kind of flexibility. It's just that you have to be sure which git you're pushing to. Normally, the one that I have, you will not have access to. If you try to push to mine, it'll throw up an error. So that's a bit of a sanity check for you. But when you're pushing, you just have to be careful where you're trying to push. You may think that you have pushed to your own repository, but you may not have.
Okay.
So that's the only caveat there.
Yeah. No, this is good. This is good because we're starting to build up our ADMs and our SM spec as Dimitri will
Mhm.
show. Dimitri, if you do a git pull, I merged everybody's changes into the main branch.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just do it right now.
All right.
Yeah.
Vinay, is there a GitHub ID that we should use to add you to that repo?
Yeah. So the one from where you get your ADM files, Vinay programs, sorry, it's plural. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm gonna add that now. Okay, I'm gonna add your ID now, and then make sure that you have access as a collaborator.
Mhm.
Okay, you should be added, Vinay, and then
If you can just give me the link to the repository, I'll try opening it.
I'm gonna. Here's the link, and then Joe, I'll do the same thing for you. That way, because what we're trying to do is build out a a set of scenarios that we can reuse.
Mhm.
So if there could be ADMs in there that the group had put together that might be helpful.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
I can access it.
Okay. And then Joe, I'll do the same thing with your GitHub ID.
Sounds good.
One quick suggestion, in your repository, you have committed your PNG files and all of that. You can probably skip those using git ignore because these can be generated anytime. So pushing those to your repository really doesn't help much.
Oh, true. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So normally I git ignore my dot files, PNG files, dot attack files, and dot feature files, because these can be generated by the tool if you want.
Okay.
Let me list them out in the chat. That way it's easier for you.
Okay. Okay, Dimitri, are you in a good place to walk through your questions now?
Yeah, I haven't pulled the I'm having trouble pulling the SM spec right now, but I have my graph and all that set up.
Okay. All right. Because I'm gonna get my laptop set up on my end while you're talking.
Okay, I'll show you now. All right, you guys see my mouse moving?
Okay.
Okay, all right. So this is a continuation of last week's ADM, going on the based off that Reddit incident in 2023. I redid it a little bit from the ground up. Last time, it was based off like very specific instances. So I tried taking Vinay's advice to make it more generalized and realistic, and utilize more realistic defenses and stuff like that. Let's see. Let's pan it over here. All right, I'll start off with the assumptions for the model. I didn't really have any assumption at the end of when I created this ADM. I didn't have anything in the assumptions, but that's probably because I need to like flesh it out, like have a more fleshed out analysis on it in order to necessitate anything going in the assumptions. For the sake of the presentation, I just put that provider has sensitive data protected through policies, and then provider restricts public access to user emails, which will come in later. Going into the security policy. Actually, before that, I just wanted to note I tried taking the advice on shortening, condensing all the boxes. I remember last time Vinay told me to try and keep things like short and sweet to the point, and I did what you said, where any context for it, I just included in the when-then statements. So when people look at the boxes, they can just reference that whenever they need a clarification.
Yeah.
So going into security policies, the assumptions we have for the company we're working with, the provider utilizes MFA soft tokens, basically like SMS or email, one-time passwords type of thing. Email address is used for, I refer to it as inter-service work, or not publicly viewable. By that I mean this specific company has their users using emails that are only communicating with other users within the same company, and they're not supposed to make contact with people outside of the company from these emails, just to keep the email secure, to prevent like email phishing attacks and stuff, make it harder for attackers to get a hold of your email in the first place. On top of that, the emails designated to basically just said that the emails designated for the inter-service work don't send emails to addresses outside of their scope of work. So you're not sending it to anyone that's not in your organization. Defenses I have for the security policy, I have unique email senders must be vetted by a security member. So basically, any email that gets sent that's not recognized, that's not like a normal email address that usually sends emails to the users, that email gets rerouted to basically like a pending review kind of thing. I'm not too sure on the specifics of it. I don't know how to refer to it as a repository or another email, however it works, but the gist of it is emails don't go to anyone unless it's already confirmed, like a normal email that people usually get traffic from, or if it's unique, then a security member will vet it through. As far as we got the second defense, multi-factor authentication is required when accessing from a unique host machine. Last time I had it was kind of weird. I don't think it was like really like realistic how the multi-factor authentication like popped up. This makes more sense. If you're from a unique host machine, it prompts you to do multi-factor authentication. This seems pretty more straightforward. Third defense is unique host machine traffic is observed and reviewed. So anytime anyone does connect, like if someone's prompted from a unique host machine, and then they go through the multi-factor authentication, and then they're signed in and doing whatever they're doing. If you're from a unique host machine, all this stuff you do is more attentively monitored, and is going to basically have a tag in it saying, "Hey, review all the traffic conducted by this host machine, just to make sure nothing shady happened." The last policy defense would be users undergo social engineering awareness training. That'll come in later, but it's basically, we all know it's how to identify phishing emails, how to not get scammed, how to not give up your credentials, stuff like that. Going to the first defense, it's the attacker reverse engineers target users' email. So the context behind this is attacker finds how the email formats are, how the formats for the email addresses are, and then targets a specific user, and then uses that user's information to reverse engineer the email address to send stuff to. The preemptive defense is obviously the emails aren't publicly viewable, so it's going to be pretty hard for the attacker. You'd have to find a way to get a hold of an example of the email address. Stemming from that, if they successfully find the email address format, they then identify the format in which emails are written. So basically, in order to create a convincing email, they're going to see how are emails usually written within this service, like how do people talk to each other, and they're going to create what looks like a legitimate email from what looks like a legitimate email address to try and sneak in, so to say. It's really the same preemptive defense right here. User emails are private. In this case, the incident response would be if the user identifies this as a phishing attack by virtue of their anti-social engineering or by virtue of the training to help identify phishing emails, then they just report it under Active Fit. In the case they don't recognize it as that, actually, I should clarify that. In this case, because this email is coming from a unique email address, like it's not normal, this will be getting sent to some security agent, whatever, that's going to vet the email and send it out. So in this case, the error is coming from a complacent security worker that sees the email and thinks, oh, it looks good enough like the other ones. It's probably just a glitch, whatever, and then sends it out through. Going back to when the email gets sent, delivered to the targeted user's email, that now that user has access to their email address, they can make communication with that person. So they're going to send them a phishing email where the person clicks on a link that looks like a link to the website they normally use, and they basically parody the website. They create a clone of what their working environment looks like so that the person feels comfortable in putting their credentials on that website. When in reality, when the person puts their credentials on the website, the attacker is getting it like live. They're getting their username and password. At this point, right here, the attacker uses their username password, attempts to log in, and then here's when the MFA kicks in. The MFA says, hey, you're a unique host machine. We don't recognize you. We need an MFA from you. This is where that social engineering kind of comes in. So at this point, the person is kind of trying to socially engineer the user to say, hey, I need you to, I'm sending a security authentication request to you. I need you to tell me the code for security purposes or whatever. In this instance, it would likely be the person's like conning as some sort of security worker, security team, and is trying to convince the user like, hey, there's some security issues with your account. We need you to log on so we can handle it. In this case, the person buys that. They think, oh, I'm dealing with one of our security guys. They feel comfortable giving out this one-time password because they think that's how things work. In reality, they just give up the two-step verification, which in turn gives the attacker access to their account and the website, everything that comes with that. Once this person gets into the account, they have access at this point, so you're kind of screwed. The best thing we can do is just set a tag on them because they have a unique host machine. Set a tag, monitor everything they're doing very closely to review it later. And then at this point, they're probably going to get your sensitive data, which in that case, the last the last thing you can really do is just track whatever they're doing, so you can at least identify what damage they cause, so you can address it. That's pretty much the gist of the whole thing, honestly. From start to end, that's pretty much all I have for that.
Yeah. So this kind of covers almost all the bases around email security. There are a few things that I would like to talk about. First of all, it's okay to not start with assumptions, because you end up building assumptions as you build your model. You cannot figure out your assumptions when you have an empty model. So it's okay to have empty assumptions to start with. Now, in your policy, the second assumption is pretty much the same as the defense you have, where you're saying inter-service work emails are not publicly viewable. But then here you also have a defense called emails are not publicly viewable. So probably you can take that assumption off. Or you can have this defense inside the policy, because this defense is part of implementing that policy. So showing it inside the green box and then drawing an arrow from attack to that defense makes much more sense in terms of readability.
Question about that. You're saying, just to make sure I understand, you're saying like there could be an error going from this defense right here to one of the attacks?
No. So you have emails are not publicly viewable is one defense, right?
Yep.
The first purple box. Yeah. That can be moved inside the policy.
Okay.
Because you're assuming that it's part of the policy. So naturally, the defense you implement should be implemented to kind of meet that policy's guidelines.
Okay.
So the person who reads it understands that, let's say you give this to the VP of security in the business. Now he understands that he defined the policy, and this is the defense the team has implemented to realize that policy, because this box is inside that green box.
Okay.
So it gives you a lot of clues about how defenses are implemented if you're doing it as part of a policy.
All right, how's that?
Yeah. And specifically on the publicly viewable stuff, historically, that kind of helped people do some security around emails. But nowadays, attackers are smart enough to figure things out. For example, if you pick any company, normally the executives and folks who are open to the public, like marketing, sales, CEO, CFO, their emails tend to be accessible on or available on the internet. Now, if I take the copy of a CEO's email, I know exactly what their domain is and how they're structuring the ID. Maybe it's first name dot last name, or the first character of the first name and followed by the entire last name. There are variations that companies apply, but it's very easy to figure that out because they apply it consistently all the way from CEO down to the junior most engineer.
Okay.
So hiding emails from public is really not going to help security, because attackers really don't care. They don't even try to search for those emails. They just pick one email that's public, look for the format, and then go to LinkedIn and see if this engineer works for this company. If so, they know the format. And they know what his email should typically be. So while I'm not saying you should take off this private defense, you can keep it for completion's sake, but going forward, you should possibly expand this to a scenario where attacker can figure out emails without digging around in the internet. And then when it comes to email rerouting and monitoring, in general, folks don't do it because let's take a hypothetical scenario. It's a small company, 200 people, everybody gets 10 emails, which means in a day you're getting 2,000 emails. And on the worst of the days, if all the 2,000 emails are from an attacker, it basically overloads the security team and they won't be able to help anybody.
Okay.
So normally companies utilize some kind of a tool, email security tools, where the tool will first try to figure out whether it's from an attacker. It'll try to see which mail server it's coming from, what is the ID, and then it'll look into its database to see if it matches something. If so, it'll already flag it as spam or phishing attack. So you should probably include a few defenses around using email security tool.
Okay.
So instead of showing that everything has to go to security and they have to manually verify everything, you can put the security tool as the first step, and anything the tool cannot figure out, it forwards it to a security operations team who can then review it manually.
All right, roger that. Makes sense.
And in terms of observability, this is good enough for this model. But in general, what happens is companies will log everything they can about emails and email servers.
Mhm.
But what they have is a bunch of business logic on top of it to filter out the noise from the ones that actually are phishing emails. Now, that's an entirely separate space of discussion. But if you think you want to include it for completion's sake, because when you're presenting it to the customer, if they ask, how are you dealing with flooding in logs? A tech-savvy customer will detect that missing defense immediately or a missing effect. So if you want, you can include that to this model. If not, it can still be a separate model, and you can pull that up only when customer asks that question.
Okay.
But otherwise, this pretty much nicely covers the flow in terms of how somebody would try to do a email phishing and social engineering for credentials.
All right. Thank you.
So, Vinay, Dimitri he spent some time researching the nature of the attack in the Reddit breach. How should we, if we wanted to contribute this back to the community, we had started by gathering links about the attack, and we were putting the links in our SM spec doc. But are there particular things that you would want us to include, research, or kind of vet before we brought this to you and said, hey, I think we want to submit this? Our goal is to break down similar attacks in the same way, and have them ready for you to look at so that we could submit them.
So first step is to make sure your model faithfully reproduces the blog that you're sourcing it from. So beyond that, it's all optimization and additions or modifications based on what we see. Sometimes the blog may assume something and they'll not talk about it. The blog may just put a link to some other blog saying how, let's say you are talking about a hacker gang. Now, the common methods the hacker gang uses, the blog will not focus on it. It may just put a link to it and move on. At that time, if showing hacker gang's behavior in the model makes more sense, that can probably be the second or third iteration. But the very first step should be to faithfully reproduce the blog so that we have some base on which we can build.
Are there any sources that you would consider to be better than others? Like we found a lot in bleeping computer. There are like 3 or 4 sources that tend to report on this type of thing, but is there one that you would consider to be better than others, or is there a go-to that you use?
I normally subscribe to a bunch of feeds that we have from work, so you may also be receiving that. Majority of the links typically come from Bleeping Computer, but once in a while you will see a few tech blogs from security researchers that are much better than that. So yeah, in general, Bleeping Computer is a good start. But I also go to Krebs on security. He is a very prolific blogger. And I think I have a few more somewhere. I should have a reading list. I can probably dig it out and send it to you.
Okay. And is there a minimum number of sources that you would consider in order to collaborate what we're putting together as being as close to known information at the time of publication?
Many a times it starts with a single source. Like if it's a breach that happened last year, you can find multiple sources to make sure, and you can vet your information by looking at multiple sources. But if it's a very recent breach, maybe it happened last week, there's a very good chance you'll have just one blog talking about it.
Okay.
So it's still a good start to have at least one source. And that's why I recommended putting the link to the source in your files as a way to show where you got it from. So it's like how Wikipedia does. When you write a Wikipedia article, they expect you to put the links from where you got that information to write that article. So it's just a similar approach I'm recommending here.
Okay. We one of the things that we wanted to try and do is create a minimally viable submission for the community.
Mhm.
What would you consider to be a minimum? Would it be an SM spec with one or more ADMs and the background information?
The minimum would be a single ADM. That's it. Like you can build an ADM at a use case level where you can say that this is how company X or company Y got breached. You just lay out the attacks into the model, and that's it. That's probably the minimum viable submission because it tells the reader the exact steps the attacker took to get to where he got. How did he succeed in his breach? Now, on top of it, we can start building SM spec because sometimes you may not know what entities were involved. Like if this is some company, you don't know the internals of the company, how their network is laid out, what servers were involved. Sometimes it may come out, sometimes it may not. So majority of the cases, you'll not have enough information to build a SM spec. At that time, a single ADM just showing the attack flow is a good enough submission.
What I'd like to try and do then is, if you're okay with it, we're going to huddle and make sure that we've captured all the lessons learned from the last two sessions. And then next Friday, we've got some other ADMs we built for a different scenario. We'd like to present those to you and kind of look at that as an opportunity to refine our checklist so that we're producing models that we could submit to you to put into the community. And then hopefully we'll clean up this ADM and what we're going to present next Friday, and those could be items that we could get into your funnel for review. Does that sound like a good thing?
Yeah, it does.
Good plan? Okay.
Yeah. One thing with SM spec is that if you're building one, ADDB will typically contain every entity as a separate entry, as a separate file, which means we'll have to spend time building ADMs for that very entity before we can push it into ADDB and consider it as valuable. So it's much easier to build just an ADM and push it to ADDB. And once we have enough ADMs in place, only surrounding that entity, then we can define the SM spec for that component and say all these ADMs belong to this specific component called ABC, for example.
Could we, in our next meeting, could we come to you with two clean ADMs, or at least reviewable, and then could we walk through pushing it to ADDB?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, I think that'll be our goal then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And since I have the link to your repo and we have a Discord channel, we should probably discuss this and collaborate. So when we actually do the streaming, we basically walk through the submission process.
That sounds good. That sounds really good. I don't have any other things I was going to suggest we talk about today. I wanted to ask Dimitri or Joe if you had any questions for Vinay.
Hey, Rod, I should be all good. I cleared up the only questions I had early on in the call there.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm good for now with the feedback I got.
Okay. Vinay, any other guidance for us before we close the meeting out?
Nothing at this point. This looks to be a good starting point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We're definitely having a lot of fun. We're learning a lot, and it's been some great discussion. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Vinay, Dimitri, and Joe. I'll go ahead and close the live stream.
Roger that. Thank you, Vinay.
Thanks a lot. Take care.